Welcome in, Slumpbusters. It is your host, Juju and Kyle here. As part of our continued NBA coverage, it is time to talk the number one seeded Phoenix Suns. Before we go any further, remember to like and subscribe to our channel. The Suns, from start to finish, were one of the most dominant teams in basketball, never really stopping, even while CP3 missed time later in the season. In total, the Suns won 65 games this season. My co-host basically had them written in Sharpie at the top of his power rankings. We're staying locked in to our NBA coverage with Locked On today, as we are joined by contributor at Suns.com and Dime Magazine and host of Locked On Suns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, Brendon Kleen. Brendon, how have you been enjoying the playing games while the Suns kind of lie in wait of their first-round opponent?
It's a little stressful. I think it's a weird byproduct of the play-ins where the one seed is the team that finds out last. I mean, ideally, it's not a great team, but you don't know who you're playing until like 48 hours before tip-off. So just been watching, enjoying like everybody else, wondering who the Suns are going to end up taking on.
Well, at least we're whittling it down. We only have the two possible outcomes here. It's seeming like the Clippers are probably the favorite to get that 8 seed position. Like I mentioned, the Suns won 65 games this season, coming off a season in which they made the NBA Finals. They were a little bit of an upstart team this year, but bringing back a lot of that same core. What do you feel is different, though, about this 2022 Suns unit as opposed to the 2021 version?
Yeah, first and foremost, I mean, you can talk about they didn't have a backup center really last year in the playoffs. They didn't have consistency from the bench. Some of those things have changed, but the biggest thing is Devin Booker has taken his game to another level. I mean, the NBA is going to be decided by great players making great plays at the end of the day, and he's stepped it up. He's turning the ball over at a fraction of what he was. He is making his threes, taking more threes, and he just has control over the game in a way that you kind of just have to watch to see it with a certain level of star. Those young guys who do it at a high level, that next step is always that control. And I think he's flashed that. So they're deeper, a little more versatile, but their star is going to take them where they need to go at the end of the day. And I think he's better equipped to do that than he was a year ago.
And to add on to the steps that Devin Booker has taken, he's having his most efficient scoring season this season. And that even comes as Chris Paul missed time for about a month, I think it was, kind of in February, March time. And it's been a great run for them. So how do you feel like Devin Booker's game has evolved since kind of that? I guess the turning point was like the 8-0 stretch they had in the bubble in 2020. How do you feel like his game has kind of evolved since then?
Yeah, first of all, love the hat. Didn't see you on the big screen until you asked the question there. Valley Sports, very, very much like to see that. No, I think with Book, it really is that control, because there's some of those statistical things you can point to. But if you think back to, I believe it was game 3 of the finals last year, he scores 40 plus points, but very little other in the way of the box score. And it felt like watching that game that what the Bucks were trying to do was basically to kind of coax him into scoring. I think they felt like, we can give up 40, 50 to Booker, but we don't necessarily feel like he's going to play make at a high enough level to get everybody else involved. We don't necessarily feel like he will take shots, that he's maybe wanting to take. We can kind of put him in the spots that we want him. And so that game is a perfect example of, I think, where he was. And then you take, like you were just talking about, some of those games where Paul missed this year that I think showed the progress. He basically played point guard. I mean, I think 3 games out of the All-Star break, he was the starting point guard for this team. He was like a 30-10 threat in all of those games. They won, I believe, 2 out of the 3 of those games. They lost the first one. And he's just been able to add those other components. He's setting guys up better. He's taking what the defense is giving him a little bit more. And I think the end of the day, you're seeing a guy who looks and feels a lot more like I'm not comparing him to Kevin Durant or Jason Tatum or those types of players, because they're not exactly the same types of guys. But I think he's at that level in terms of somebody you trust a lot more to be that 1A on a title team than maybe this time last year.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson. They were key draft picks from years past, and suddenly they've developed into really good role players and kind of this run of success that Phoenix has been having. They do a great job supplementing on defense for the tandem of CP3 and Devin Booker. Can you talk about their overall impact on this team?
Yeah, they've grown too. I mean, there's only so much you can toss into an answer when you're asked what the difference is. So you're totally right to give some shine to those guys too. I think with Bridges, his defense to me he came in at such a high floor but obviously the defensive player of the year buzz and all that stuff is well warranted. I think well, first of all, he's in foul trouble less often. He is kind of able to impact the game as a team defender, playing the passing lanes, rebounding, things like that, in addition to doing what he always has done as a isolation stopper, one-on-one kind of glove type of defender. And then he's scoring better. I mean, he's getting to that mid-range jumper. He's super efficient there. He can attack closeouts and dunk. And then, yeah, Deandre Ayton, I mean, I think it's just been slow progress from last year. I don't know if there's one thing you can necessarily break down. He's a little more comfortable with the ball in his hands and just feels a little bit more like a sure thing, similar to what we were just talking about with Booker. But I think he's seen the biggest growth out of anybody in this young core this season for sure.
So you've been covering the Suns more on a day-to-day basis than most people. I wanted to ask you about the coaching job that Monty Williams has done this year, because nationally, he falls behind like Taylor Jenkins and Eric Spoelstra and Ime Udoka when people talk about coach of the years this year, but they went to the finals last year, which was his second season. Third year, they have the best record in the conference. They didn't really add any pieces over the offseason, at least significant pieces, and, improve their win total by about 10 games. So how do you feel about the coaching job Monty's done this year?
Yeah, I mean, he should be the coach of the year, in my opinion. I don't know what the deal is there, to be honest with you. I mean, we already saw here in Suns land that he didn't get it last year when he did sort of fit that narrative of like, oh, the team that makes the big jump always gets that award. And he didn't get it for that. Now it's like it's already old news to people a little bit. It feels like, which is funny because it's like, okay, well, you didn't reward him when it was new. Now you're not rewarding him because it's old. I don't understand. It seems like that race will go down to the wire. You're seeing a lot of Jenkins votes in addition to a lot of votes for Monty. But I mean, I think what he does as a coach is his system isn't so much of a system is what's funny. It's more of a structure. It's more of like rules than it is sets. And so I think he's able to put guys in a position to succeed who are younger, who need that sort of structure. Deandre Ayton, I think, probably the biggest beneficiary of Monty's coaching of anybody on this team. But even guys like Cameron Payne, who was, overseas and didn't know if his NBA career was ever going to come back, and comes in and it just hits the ground running with the Suns. You have Cam Johnson, who, people had a lot of questions about as a draft prospect when he was taken so high in the lottery by the Suns. And he's turned into somebody really special, just using what players already have. And I think being confident in them and giving them the tools to like, hey, if that shot feels comfortable to you, take it. If you think you can play with these guys, then we'll try you out in that lineup. Like, it's sort of that flexibility within the structure and just having that structure for the guys who need it that I think has really helped. And it's also just a match made in heaven to have Chris Paul there as well. I mean, he kind of puts all of at least on the offensive end especially, puts all of it together in a way that guys are just able to flourish.
Speaking of Chris Paul, one of the biggest stories in the NBA this season was the downfall of the Lakers, how a 37-year-old LeBron James seems more content at this point to bring in his older buddies than he is to embrace younger talent. But you have a 36-year-old CP3 who is surrounded by young guys, signs that extension in Phoenix, and has really turned these guys into stars, if not superstars. Can you tell me some of the core leadership differences between CP3 and LeBron James?
Well, I can't speak too much to LeBron. I think what you're saying is exactly right on, though. I mean, I think he has done it a different way. And I always go back to when it comes to Chris, the season he spent in Oklahoma City. I think that was really eye-opening for him, where he didn't want to go there, but also didn't want his career to be over. So he was in a little bit of a rock and a hard place situation where it's like, how do I handle this? So he tells Sam Presti, I'm not resting on back-to-backs or any of that. No, the answer is no. I'm not going to roll over and treat this season like a waste. And he turns that team into a 4 seed, 5 seed, whatever they ended up being, and a playoff team, right? It's a young group, and you've seen what they've turned into without him there. I mean, yes, Dennis Schroeder also left, Steven Adams left, but that group is nowhere near as competitive. And so I think that was eye-opening for him. And then he comes to Phoenix and is able to turn it on. That in that same way, he's able to just sort of be that last missing piece that they needed. And this roster was already better than Oklahoma City. So the heights that they've been able to reach have just been higher. But I think that leadership started there. And yeah, it is fascinating, the comparison between him and LeBron. I think the idea of they're both great passers, both great playmakers, both guys that people like to play with, but late in their careers, they're definitely taking a different trajectory. And one of them might end up with a ring at the end of the season, and the other one missed the playoffs. I mean, there's a lot that went into all that, but that's kind of where we stand. It's fascinating.
So last year in the finals, I remember it was around like game 2 or 3 when Drew Holiday started guarding Chris Paul, and Bucks were kind of like daring them to shoot 3-pointers. And the phrase I kept hearing in coverage was like, the Suns don't shoot enough threes. They don't shoot enough threes. And it felt like it was overdrawn because of how good Devin Booker and Chris Paul are as mid-range jump shooters. And like, that's the shot you'd prefer them taking. So how do you feel about the Suns offense headed into this season in regards to shot selection and how they've kind of balanced their offense between, obviously Ayton is the big guy who scores most of his points inside. They tried to turn him into a 3-point shooter early in his career to, the way that they kind of run their offense.
It's really unique, right? I mean, they are a throwback team. They take tons of mid-range shots. They don't really offensive rebound all that well. They don't get to the basket. They take some threes, but in a league, the way that the league is right now, that it's not a lot compared to their opponent most nights. So I think that's why I come back to Booker so much, is because what happened at the end of the finals, I think kind of made it overblown how out of whack that series was. I think you see one team win 4 times and it feels like it was really lopsided. The bottom line is games 3 and 4 were decided by one possession. They won games 1 and 2, and then Giannis did what Giannis did. But of course, not taking that away from them. They got it done in 6 games, and that's an all-time performance. But this was close, is what I'm saying. And so Booker being able to turn some of the pull-up mid-range shots that he had maybe taken last year into threes, pull-up threes, or the confidence of Mikal Bridges to be somebody that the defense needs to respect from all 3 levels, or the ability of Deandre Ayton to catch the ball on the roll as a screen and roll threat and pass out to his opponents, spray passes out to 3-point shooters, or make the little floater that he's gotten better at. It only is going to take this team being 10, 15, 20% better to get the job done. And that's if they face as difficult of a road as they did last year. I mean, the first round's already looking like it's going to be a little easier. The finals, we'll see if they get there and who that is. But those little things I think will be enough. I don't think it's about taking more threes. I honestly don't even think it's about taking more shots at the rim, which is another, like I said, thing that they've gotten criticized for. I think their shot distribution is just fine as long as they make the shots they've always made. It's just pulling the defense apart a little bit more, keeping the defense honest more consistently, and not allowing games like the one I referenced where Booker is able to go off, but not much else goes on offensively. You can't have those games anymore. And I actually believe that was game 4. I think I said it was 3 earlier. So that's going to be the bottom line, but I think they have everything they need. I mean, they just proved it over 82 games. It's just going to be about doing it again and doing it at a higher level.
Now, the phrase last dance has been thrown around a little liberally these days ever since the documentary came out in 2020. But with the uncertainty around DeAndre Ayton, I've heard that same sentiment cast on this Phoenix Suns team. Do you believe that this is their best chance to capitalize within a title window? And are you concerned that that title window could close quickly if a guy like Ayton is no longer with this team?
I think that's a big, obviously, underlying subplot with this group. I think if he were to leave, it would be, he's a restricted free agent, right? So I imagine it would be more on the Suns' terms. I don't really see a situation where they would just not match a contract and just allow him to walk. I think you'd be talking about a trade or something like that. The team could look different. It is definitely an accurate way to frame this. Cam Johnson's up for an extension, and it does start to get very expensive. That all said, all windows are fleeting. I think you run into that a lot in sports. So I can't predict the future necessarily to say I'm 100% confident that they'll continue to compete for championships, but I don't really see a slowing down happening with Chris Paul. And until that happens, I think Booker's going to continue to get better. I think these young guys are going to continue to get better. So it might look different, but I don't have a reason to believe it will fall off in any way, even if some of those changes do happen that we talked about.
Headed into the playoffs, what is the matchup that gives you the most pause for the Suns? Is it Denver, Memphis, the Dallas Mavericks maybe? I know Luka looks like he's going to be out for some time here. Golden State, which team gives you pause?
It's the Warriors, yeah. Not only because I think they're just the second best team or maybe best team, depending on how you want to really argue it, but it's just been hard to get a gauge on them. So that's part of why it's so tough to say where they are or how they stack up. We don't know what the team looks like. Those guys, 3 of them haven't played at full health at all this year, and obviously the prior two either. So if there's a version of them that looks close to what we know they can all be together, I think that infrastructure is scary. It has to terrify any team. And I also just think defensively, the versatility that they are able to put out there has always been tough for the Suns. If anybody watched the 3 games they played this year, right away early in the season, then on Christmas, and then there was another one right after, anyone will remember the Suns offense got bogged down. And that happens against most teams. They were far and away the best defense in the NBA basically until Draymond Green got hurt. So they can turn that back on, and Steph and Clay are able to score. Jordan Poole, throw him in there as well. He's stepped up this year. Then yeah, that team is going to be tough. Fortunately for the Suns, that won't happen until the conference finals, and I think that's probably where this is headed, and it'll be a fun series. But I do still think the Suns probably would have to be taken above them just because the uncertainty with injuries, holds you back from the Warriors.
Thank you, Brendon. Great insight into the best team in the Western Conference. Any obligatory plugs you got for us, man, before you head out?
No, you got it all at the beginning. Thanks for having me, guys.
All right. Stick with Brendon. Stick with our YouTube channel. Plenty of NBA coverage to come in the next few weeks. Juju and Kyle here. Stay safe, happy, and healthy. We will see you next time.